Welcome, everyone, to the Find Your Flow podcast by Highland Yoga, hosted by founder Elsie Brotherton and co-hosts Reedy Dukes and Annalie Burke. Highland Yoga is an Atlanta-based hot yoga studio founded in 2015 in the quaint neighborhood of Virginia Highlands. And it's hard to wrap our minds around just how much we've grown and evolved since then. We already know our community is hooked on whatever magic is within our walls, and we want to offer you more outside of that. We can't wait to dive deep into all things yoga and wellness, but more importantly, what makes our world go round: our teachers, our devoted students, our community offerings, and more. Thanks for tuning into the podcast. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of the Find Your Flow podcast. I'm your host, Reedy Dukes, and I'm here today with Laura Venable. Laura, I'll let you introduce yourself. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor. So my name is Laura. I am from Atlanta originally, but I'm currently living in South Carolina, and I've been practicing yoga for probably about 12 years now, and I've been teaching yoga since 2017. I am trained in a type of yoga called yoga synergy, which is a very fluid type of yoga, but it's really active. It's kind of dancey. And then I also really love yoga nidra, and I love all things yoga. So it's great to be here to talk to you about that.
Cool. Well, I like to start pretty much every episode by asking about your yoga journey. So what did your life look like when you were introduced to yoga, and what was maybe your first experience with yoga?
Yeah, so my first experience with yoga was probably when I was 18. My mom took me to a Bikram class, and I remember being so overwhelmed by it, like sitting down in the middle of the class a lot. And I like to say that yoga presented itself to me until it really stuck. I took a class in yoga at Georgia State randomly, and it kind of, it sort of landed, sort of didn't. I studied abroad for a year in France, and I found myself going to yoga classes there. And that was a fun experience, especially them being in another language. And then it really landed, though, in my early 20s when I was at school at the Creative Circus, which was in Atlanta, and it was a really intense portfolio advertising design school program. And I was really stressed. There was a lot of deadlines, and I found myself coming to yoga. And what kept me coming back was this feeling that I got after the classes where I felt lighter, I felt just more spacious in my internal landscape. And that's where it definitely hooked me. And I just kept practicing and kept evolving and exploring different styles of yoga, and kind of that put me on my journey.
Yeah, that sounds really diverse. It has travel been a big part of your life in your adulthood?
Yes. Yeah. I love traveling. I've done all of my teacher trainings abroad, and my husband and I have lived abroad together. We moved to New Zealand in 2016, and that was really transformative for my yoga experience. There are some amazing teachers in Auckland where we were living, and it just really introduced me to this kind of like deeper spiritual aspect of yoga beyond just the stress relief, but finding comfort and kind of like the lifestyle path of yoga. And I would say I definitely got into traditional styles of yoga there, like Ashtanga and Jivamukti, which are pretty physical practices. But yeah.
And what years and where did you do your yoga teacher trainings? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so I did my first yoga teacher training in 2017 with the Santosha Yoga Institute in Bali. And that was really great. It was very traditionally hatha yoga, so it was kind of slower paced, and it definitely left me hungry for more. It was just 200 hours. And then I found Yoga Synergy, but it was funny. I kind of had a list of all of these things that I wanted in a teacher. And one of them was I really wanted more depth in anatomy and physiology, because I do feel like a lot of yoga trainings don't fully teach potential teachers the body. And as soon as you start teaching, so many people come to you with all of these different ailments, and you have to know how to modify people's practices so they don't further injure themselves. And I found this practice by chance. I was working at a yoga festival in New Zealand, and I only had the time to go to one workshop, and it happened to be a yoga synergy workshop.
Mhm.
And I just immediately went up to the guy who taught it, and I was like, "Where did you learn that? I need to do that." And I started listening to Simon, and he's the one who is a co-founder of it. And he's very anatomically, like, it's kind of studying with him is kind of like drinking from a fire hose. But it's just a lot. He's a character. But I studied with him in Italy in 2019, and then again later that year, 2019, down in Sydney, Australia for a little bit. And then in 2022, I did a yoga nidra training with Jenna Romer. She's like a poet with her voice. She's amazing.
Oh, that's awesome. I want to go to a yoga nidra training.
Oh, it's definitely worth it. It's a different experience from something that's more oriented around asana.
Yeah, maybe that'll be my next thing.
Yeah.
But this is not about me. Okay, so could you describe that first class experience with Yoga Synergy?
Yeah, so this guy Morgan, they have a retreat center in Barcelona, but he's a Kiwi, so he was down traveling and doing these workshops, and he has these silent disco headphones that they use. So it was like a room full of 40 people, and everybody had their own headsets on, and he's a DJ. And so my husband is actually a DJ too, and we were doing something at the time, just to give some history, called Sonic Flow. And he was DJing while I would teach yoga, and it was like this full somatic experience, but it was just based off of the one training that I had done at the time.
Mhm.
So I went into Morgan's workshop, and we all had these silent disco headsets on, and the playlist was just like immaculate. Like, it really set the vibe, and it was really slow and it needed to be slow, and then really high in intensity, and it just really brought you into your body. And it's a very dancey like practice. So part of the philosophy of yoga synergy is that you should always enter into anything with active movement. So there's also sorry, let me collect my thoughts for a second. So it's really dancey, and it kind of takes you into every joint complex in a fluid way. And it's hard for words to fully describe it. So it's very like demonstration oriented.
Yeah.
And just between the music and this kind of dancey, it's really hard to describe, but it was just magical. And I just felt something that I had never felt from a standard yoga class. And this practice has evolved with kind of like a Qi Gong influence more recently. And you can feel this energy that you cultivate in this practice kind of like a magnet. And I had just never felt that before. I had never felt my own energy. And at the end of the class, he had us hold our hands probably like 6 inches apart. And you can just feel this like pulsating heat, magnetic energy. Like, that's the best way I can describe it. If you have two magnets that you're kind of trying to bring together, and you can feel the presence of the other one, even though they're not touching. And I just fell in love with it. And I knew that that was something that I wanted to learn more about and bring that experience to other people. So, yeah, that's what led me to go up to him after the class and say, "Where can I learn this?"
So with the headphones, was there any like vocal instruction, or is it more just he was demonstrating and you were following and like improvising?
No, he had a mic, so he was
So you
giving
could also hear
some,
him.
yeah, you could also hear him, and it was like he was in your head. And that's not how Simon teaches. So the guy who really started the practice, this is funny to say because it's so different, but he teaches in like clicking. So oh, I know. So that is extremely demonstration based. I don't teach that way. I think most people respond best to instruction. And so he sets you up in a semicircle, and he does that intentionally. So your gaze is always forward and your neck isn't in an unnatural position. So, like, if you're, in kind of a standard setup, everybody is facing the front of the room, the teacher's at the front of the room. Somebody is going to be kind of looking around and their neck might not be in the optimal position. So that's why they do the semicircles.
It's so funny. Okay, so you trained with the one of the founder from your first class abroad. Is that what you said?
No, he just
Oh,
introduced me to this methodology. And
okay, okay.
then I kind of went on a deep dive of YouTubes and all of the recordings. And like I said, I had this list of criteria that I was looking for my next teacher training. And this Simon just met all of them. And yeah, he is a research scientist, a physical therapist, and I really appreciated there was a strong understanding of the body from both an Eastern and a Western perspective. I just his journey started with Iyengar yoga, but actually
Mhm.
studying with Iyengar in India. And then he got into Ashtanga and studied with Pattahbi Jois. So he had a very like traditionally rooted background, which I was interested in at the time. But he kept seeing people injure themselves in yoga classes and like coming to him with knee pain or lower back pain or shoulder pain. And a lot of that, I think, is human nature to push ourselves really far into finding the most advanced variation of a posture. Like I'm guilty of it. I've definitely
Mhm.
overstretched in a class and then felt it later on. And so that's kind of what created this inception of yoga synergy was adapting the practice to the modern body, so to speak. And like yoga, how it was created for people, hundreds of years ago, their bodies were different from our bodies. And a lot of that is like our lifestyle is completely different. Like
Mhm.
I did travel through Sri Lanka. I haven't been to India yet, but it's on my list. But it was surprising to see at the bus stops people sitting in malasana, like they were just in a squat,
Mhm.
sitting there like that. And um, a lot of people find something like malasana to be a challenging thing for their
Yeah, I've
hips.
heard it been referred to as the universal resting pose, but then in class over here, you watch people, get into it. It doesn't seem natural at all for a lot
Yeah.
of people.
Yeah, and a lot of that is our use of chairs. And
Uh,
even if later on, like even if you're a flexible and mobile person, you've still been sitting in a chair to go through the school system, to drive around everywhere. Like chairs have just changed how our bodies have developed. So kind of the philosophy behind some of these movements and yoga's energy is that it's an adaptation for the modern body and just things like a chronically compressed lower back that comes from sitting in chairs or knee pain that comes from walking around on concrete all the time and not having that natural give from the earth or natural shoes that allow for a proper toe splay and how we just need to adapt our practice to help our bodies feel good when we practice yoga because ultimately that's what it's about. It's about making your body feel better and not creating to discomfort or pain.
so I'm curious, and you sent me a YouTube video and I watched like 30 seconds of it before this, but um if you can, like to the best of your ability, describe the movement compared to like, are there static movements or is it all fluid? And do any of them look like traditional yoga poses or is it totally different?
Yeah, I debated if I should send you that video because he's a kind of trippy character. Like if you would imagine like a trance dance, this is like somebody who would be
And it
there.
does look like Tai Chi. I mean, because you mentioned Qi Gong, which is that's a form of Tai Chi, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, if I could describe it, it starts, a lot of those movements are nerve tensioning exercises. So it's tensioning the median, the ulna, and the radial nerves. And There's a large emphasis on using your body in all directions that the joints can go in. So, with the spine, for instance, there are 8 primary movements for your spine. You can compress it, you can lengthen it, you can twist to either side, so left and right, you can laterally bend left and right, and then you can extend it and then fold forward.
Mhm.
So, a lot of these movements that you kind of warm up the practice with are to improve your circulation through your nerves and then to warm up your spine in all 8 of the primary movement directions. And then you move actively and dynamically into the familiar asana. So, yes, you would see a lot of familiar poses. Generally, when I'm teaching yoga synergy in like a workshop or something, I start doing standard poses like maybe 25 minutes or 20 minutes into the class. And then I always start with the nerve tensioning and the spinal movements. And I always encourage my students to move within the asana. So if they were holding something like an extended side angle, to allow this natural fluctuation of movement in like the shoulder and the spine, not large movements, nothing overly exaggerated, but just kind of like this encouragement to move energy through your body, because
Mhm.
ultimately circulation is what makes us healthy. And when we can, check to make sure that our fingers are moving, when we can check to make sure that like our jaw can move and our belly can breathe, we're allowing for this circulation to take place and happen throughout the body. So when I hold something like an extended side angle, there are subtle movements. And I always kind of will say something like the tendrils of a jellyfish. So, like, really gentle movements. And I definitely feel that circulation more when I do that rather than being really static, even though there's a time and a place for it. Like, I've been doing this for about 7 years now, and I kind of go back and forth between what I'm practicing. Like, I still do enjoy doing something like Ashtanga or a more familiar vinyasa class, but there's also some days where I feel like I need to be moving more. So it just kind of that's actually probably the main thing that I learned through Yoga Synergy is how to be my own teacher and the importance of whatever you're practicing, knowing how to adapt what you're practicing just to feel good in your body.
Okay. Can you briefly explain um Ashtanga and Vinyasa, and from there I have another question.
Yeah.
Just so
So
our listeners know the difference, because a lot of people aren't really familiar with different types of yoga. So,
Yeah, so basically, the big umbrella for movement-based yoga is Hatha yoga. So I would say Ashtanga, Vinyasa, Power Yoga, all of these things fall under the Hatha umbrella. And Ashtanga yoga is a specific lineage of yoga. It comes from Pattahbi Jois. He's the one who really popularized it. I would actually say that it's probably one of the first popular types of yoga that brought yoga to the West. Like
mhm.
Madonna was doing Ashtanga, and like a bunch of teachers in Hollywood or students in Hollywood and New York. And that is probably like the 70s and 80s when that was really big. And it's supposed to be pretty rooted in philosophy, but it's also set sequencing, depending on if you're going to classes where sometimes there are group classes where you can move all together through the teacher, but then sometimes it's taught through something called Mysore style, which would be like every student has their own practice and they're in a room all practicing together, and the teacher is going around to assist and to make sure that they're, doing things properly or challenging themselves if they wanted to do that. And it's taught through series. So there's the first series, the primary series, and then once you master that series, so to speak, then you move to the secondary series, and you can kind of move up or stay where you are. It's okay if you do that too. But it is set sequencing. So it would be pretty much the same every time you do it, unlike a vinyasa class, for instance, where I would say Highland yoga is vinyasa classes.
Hmm.
And they might be different and they might incorporate, just maybe you do some sunays or maybe the teacher starts with a different type of warm up and it would just be different every time. But the poses are all similar and, all of it is from the same origin of hatha yoga.
Got it. Yeah, and vinyasa, I would say there's definitely an emphasis on transitions from pose to pose. Okay, cool. And then how familiar are you with Tai Chi and Qi Gong? And because that's an even older practice than yoga, right?
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, I personally feel like there's a lot of similarities between yoga and Qigong, and like they both touch on the elements. For instance, like in Ayurveda, there's fire, air, water, ether, forgetting one. And then in Qigong, kind of Chinese medicine origin, there's like stone, water, wood. So they kind of have different language to describe similar things. And like in yoga, we would call the chi, which is the energy and the life force, prana.
Uh-huh.
So like I mean, I started my practice, my movement practice with yoga. But then when I was living in New Zealand, this is the reason why I was at this yoga festival. There was a gentleman who asked me to do some photography for him, and he was a Qigong teacher. And I did an exchange with him to go to this Qigong workshop and in exchange for photos. And it was really interesting. It's generally slower. Like it's kind of, if you don't have the patience to move slowly, it might be challenging for you in that way. And it was for me because I think I was used to bigger, stronger movements. And
Hmm.
then having somebody move, it's hard to even describe this, but just really, really slowly, like a
Yeah.
snail moving your hand across your body or something.
And it is a lot of hand movement, right?
A lot of hand movement. And this is in Yoga Synergy. So Simon's newest teacher is named Master Yang, and Master Yang is a Qigong, Nigong teacher, and his great grandfather was in the kind of like defense of some dynasty in China. So he's like very close to this energetic line. And y- yeah, it's been interesting to watch the evolution of this practice.
Yeah, I
And
bet.
I appreciate that in something like Yoga Synergy, it moves a little bit faster than in
Uh,
traditional Qigong. But I will say, when I went to this workshop with this guy, he lit a candle and we did, this practice. And then after the practice, he didn't touch it, he didn't blow it. He kind of used his energy to blow out the candle.
no way.
Yeah, and this is something I saw with my own eyes. And it was just kind of one of those jaw on the floor moments like, wow, there is unseen energy. And in Qigong, we have channels that run through our bodies called meridians. And in yoga, we have channels called nadis. And I like to think of these as like the unseen veins in our body that distribute this vital life force, whether you're calling it chi or prana. So that's why I say I think the two practices have evolved very similarly, but they've just developed their own language to describe all of the terms and what they are.
And I think it's really easy to be skeptical, but then you think it's got to be something if it's evolved over thousands of years, starting from as an ancient practice. And I know they use qigong like in medical communities for like older adults, I think, because obviously movement is important for those populations. But I think, yeah, there's something to it. I've never tried it. I've always wanted to, though.
Yeah, like I said, it takes some patience, especially if you're used to faster movements and stronger movements. But there is something really beautiful about like the soft and subtle energies. And when I have a son, and when I was pregnant, like really pregnant, like towards the
Mhm.
end, I really grounded into these soft, subtle, energetic flows because you do cultivate just so much energy. And that sounds like such a woo-woo thing to say,
Mhm.
but everybody who comes to my yoga synergy workshops is surprised at the end of the classes when they feel their own energy, because I always love to end with the thing that really hooked me, where you can kind of hold your hand close to the other hand and you feel the presence. And it's something that words just don't describe, because you feel it. And once you have your own individual experience with something where you've experienced it directly, it's like,
Yeah.
okay, wow, that's real.
And then you believe it. And then I feel like the effects are stronger once you buy into it. In your workshops, do you explain like the foundations to start, or is it more experiential? You just walk them through it?
It's a lot more experiential. I find that with a lot of these things, words just kind of fall short.
Hmm.
Like you can only describe so much and logically interpret, but really
Hmm.
it's the expansion that comes through directly experiencing something. So I like to just give people the practice, and then at the end of the class, I like to help people with questions or if they are just curious.
So you've been actually teaching this for 7 years?
Yeah, I do primarily teach like a standard vinyasa class, but
Hmm.
I incorporate a lot of the elements that I've learned to give people a good class. I just I save it primarily for special occasions and special events and that type of thing. But my personal practice, I do this mostly in a special workshop. Like you can really create a cool environment. Like I said, my husband is a DJ, and it's really enhanced with music, and you can just drop into this flow state that's really cool.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. It sounds like music is a huge influence on the effects.
Yeah, definitely.
What kind of music do you aim for?
Well, I whenever I create playlists, I always kind of treat it like a bell curve. So I always
Uh-huh.
start with like really more traditional yoga music that you would hear in a lot of classes, like DJ Drez
Yeah,
or
I was just thinking him.
and then as the tempo intensifies, I like to do like not fully electronic music, but I don't love to do lyrics. I like to choose music that doesn't have words, or I actually am a big fan of using foreign language like
Mm,
Spanish, or just I don't speak Spanish, so I have no idea what they're saying, but it's just melodic and pretty and another dimension to the music.
mm.
But yeah, I would say I use types of electronic music, not trance music. That's not my thing. Um, but yeah, it's definitely melodic and kind of has a faster tempo to it.
Yeah, that sounds so fun. I agree. Sometimes lyrics can take you out of it, but I do think if it's in a different language, some part of our brain doesn't, like our attention doesn't totally divert to that, I think. So that
Yeah,
makes
I
a lot of
agree.
sense. Yeah. So what about just going back, what about your life, like leaning into your yoga practice? What do you think drew you the most to yoga synergy when you think about like big picture what you were needing? Does that make sense? I don't know if that question makes sense, but because you mentioned like in your teacher training you had an idea of what you're looking for and everything like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think looking back, I think there was a part of me that was kind of bored with this really slow hatha yoga, and I just have always been a mover. Like I love to move, and I think yoga synergy can be really challenging. And like Simon, I keep talking about him, but he's kind of the one who, if you are curious about this, you should look into his work. He is in his 60s, and he's just an incredible physical shape. Like in a room full of 30-year-olds, he'll practice 12 hours a day, literally. Like if you ever did a study with him, it's very movement based. And he would take breaks because the room full of 30-year-olds needed it. And he'd go up into a handstand, like, and hold it for such a long time just in the middle of the room, like nowhere near a wall, and do all of these advanced poses in his 60s. And it's like, this is somebody who has been studying yoga for 40 plus years and is a living testament to some of the longevity practices that you can
Mm,
learn. And I think I've always been really interested in longevity and
mm,
what makes me live a life that's full of vitality, and then how I can kind of then share that vitality with other people. So I think that's why I was really attracted to it. And I started feeling really good when I first started practicing it. And I mean, I have drastically improved my flexibility and my strength just ever since. And I think a lot of that is just the principles that I learned. And like one of the biggest kind of philosophies of Yoga Synergy is about really honoring the stira and the sukha, which is one of the Yoga Sutras, and it's the effort and the ease. So it kind of gave me this challenge of how can I honor both of those things? Like, how can I do something like Pancha Mayurasana and be relaxed while doing it?
mm.
How can I practice challenging poses in a way where I'm not feeling tension? Because tension is what destroys this energy that we're aiming to create when we practice yoga, like the feel good energy. And the more we can kind of engage with it in a relaxed way is just like you can do that in life. Like, how can I move through the challenges of life while being relaxed?
So do you think like,
And
because obviously it's movement up front, but do you think like this, the deeper spiritual lessons, because you mentioned that was an important aspect of any yoga practice to you. Do you feel like the movement almost becomes the teacher
yeah,
kind
yeah,
of?
the movement becomes the meditation.
Yeah.
And it definitely took me to a space that was just, it was really deep and I loved it. And I am a person who likes depth. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if you're into astrology, I have a hard Pluto aspect to my moon. So I like to go deep into things. And I've just known that about myself. And yeah, I loved how deep it took me into myself.
Yeah. Okay. So where, if someone's interested in learning more, it sounds like there's an online presence for sure, but in terms of if you're just in any big city in the US, can you find this?
Yeah, so the best way is to go to the Yoga Synergy website and there's like a Find My Teacher, Find a Teacher tab, and you can look by city. As far as I know, I'm actually the only teacher on the East Coast. There's a presence in LA, Colorado, I think, New York. There's a lot of teachers in Europe, and there are a lot of teachers in Australia and a few in New Zealand as well. It's a very international practice. Like when I studied with Simon, it was such an international group. I was one of two Americans there, but it was probably 25 people. So yeah, a lot of countries represented. And then I teach a weekly class on Insight Timer, and it's just donation based, but if you have the app, it's a really accessible way to practice it. And then there are some recorded practices on YouTube that are great too.
Okay, well, I might try this. I have to watch more of the
Yeah.
YouTube videos that you sent me first to see if it's if it scares me off. We'll see.
Yeah, those are definitely really funny. And they're quite dated too, so it might be worth looking into his newer information. And a lot of the teachers who, like Morgan, the one in Spain, he and his wife practice this type of yoga. Like they're, I would say, contemporary teachers that have made it a little bit more. Here's what I'll say. They've lowered the barriers to entry, so they've made it less intimidating because it can be an intimidating practice because it's just so different. And it actually did take me probably a few years before I felt comfortable sharing and even putting anything online because it looks different. It looks like Qigong, it looks just not like yoga, and it really made me ask myself the question of what is yoga? Is it the poses that we do, or is it the feeling that we find when we do yoga? And that's where I landed that you can be in a state of yoga with anything that you're doing. Like you can garden and you can find that state of yoga because it's ultimately the word yoga means union. So I don't know if your listeners know that, but the word yoga is to find a union with something. And I like to think of that as a union between my mind, my body, and my spirit all at the
Mhm.
same time. So for me, it just brought me into that state of yoga and it transcended shapes and it transcended all of these things and it ultimately came down to that feeling.
I don't know. There's something about those dated videos that I kind of love. I think they're so funny. And I just had a flashback to I took a I took like an outdoor education class in high school, and our teacher was just like this old school guy who lived in a bunker in Montana for a while. And he's a total outdoorsman, just bushwhacks his way through the woods. And we sat down and watched this documentary about, it was like from the 80s, people who hiked the Appalachian Trail and just like followed these funny guys. And that was kind of like my first impression of that video you sent me. Just I kind of love it. But um so you're in Florence, South Carolina. What else are you doing there besides teaching yoga?
Yeah, so we own a garden center here. It's called Forest Lake Greenhouses. And we have probably like 12 greenhouses and we grow a lot of plants and we have a retail store, but then we also sell some of the flowers wholesale to like other areas of South Carolina, like Charleston.
That's awesome. How far from Charleston is Florence?
We're about an hour and 45 minutes from
Okay.
Charleston, yeah.
Do you have plans of moving back to Atlanta ever?
Yeah, it's definitely in the cards. Like, I'm from Atlanta originally, and my husband's family is in Atlanta, and we have a young child. So, it being closer to family is something that we've been craving, just having more of our support system and our network. Like, we both went to school in Atlanta for
Mhm.
college, and it's definitely what we're working towards, maybe when the housing market gets a little bit better.
Yeah. And you went to Highland Yoga when you lived in Atlanta, right?
Yeah, I did.
Which location did you practice at?
Well, so Luke's mom lives in Buckhead. So the Buckhead studio is the closest one to her house. That's where we usually stay. So I'll go there. And then I liked the one in the Highlands, like the OG.
The OG. Yeah. It's definitely a crowd favorite. But we're having so much fun with all of our locations now. And hopefully, when you next time you come in town, come see us. Do you have any? I kind of like to, when we're wrapping up, ask if you have any random book recommendations or podcasts that you follow or anything our listeners might find interesting that's loosely on the topic that we've discussed.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely like yoga books. My favorite yoga book is by Eddie Stern. Um, I think it's called Simple Things, One Simple Thing. And it's just really comprehensive, especially if you are curious about like the path of yoga beyond just the physical movements. Like if you're just curious about some of the philosophies and I don't even really, yeah, I'd say philosophies. Like I don't think it's dogmatic or anything, but it's worth
Mhm.
looking into. And then I really like Yoga Mala. It's a Pattahbi Jois book, and I love the illustrations in it. There's something really interesting to me about looking at some of the more traditional bodies doing yoga. And these are older pictures, like probably pre-1980s. And they're just so flexible and it's really fun to look at. And then I have not listened to many podcasts recently.
I
I would
haven't either.
recommend, yeah, I wish that I did. I haven't had the time.
Yeah.
Um, I would recommend looking into Jana Romer too. She's the woman who I did my yoga nidra training with. She has some amazing resources if you're ever interested in yoga nidra. And she's also a student of Dr. Joe Dispenza. So she has this
Oh,
really cool, like modern neuroscience,
yeah.
astrological, like poetry, basically. So she has a really cool website called Attune to the Moon. And their yoga nidra is based off of like where the moon is and what the sun season is. So right now we're in Taurus, and they're just very supportive of like the current energies that might be at play. So that's a great resource I would highly recommend.
And can you just in a couple sentences explain what yoga nidra is? Because I think people
Yeah.
like picture yoga, but it's kind of it's
It's
different.
it's one of those yogas that's different. So yoga nidra is commonly called yogic sleep.
Uh-huh.
So you would be lying down the whole time. You wouldn't be doing poses at all. You'd be quite cozy, like a blanket on top, an eye pillow, bolster under the knees. And then it's a guided, some people don't like to call it a meditation, but for simple terms, let's call it a meditation. And it guides you through these different layers of your subconscious mind until you can kind of, I like to think of it as reprogramming your beliefs. So, like, I've used it as a tool to tell myself things like my voice is valuable or I am valid or, just anything that you might be working on in your life, you can kind of use that as your intention. And then I like to think of it as like a programming into yourself.
Yeah. If you have any other resources like that, please email them to me because I like to record yoga nidra meditations. And a lot of our teachers do workshops geared towards that. So
Very
do you have
cool.
any questions for me to close out before we close out?
Um, well, I mean, Highland Yoga is just so inspiring the way y'all have grown and scaled, but then still stayed connected to kind of like this community-centered approach. And I guess, would you have any advice on scaling and staying heart-centered?
I think, I think, and most people give us the feedback that even when they go on our website, it seems like such a community. And I would say that is really our main priority. And I think as we've grown, obviously, like we have almost 100 teachers across all um, 10 of our in-state location or all 10 of our locations. We have 10, we have 9 in-state, one in Nashville. But as the teacher community grows, I would say that's kind of a model of our student community. So I think communication has been huge. And that's been a big part of my job is like facilitating communication between the leadership team and the teachers. And then I think the more connected the teachers feel and a lot of the locations we teach at, most people teach at 2 or 3 different ones. So there's a lot of overlap. So even though we've expanded, there's a lot of overlap of teachers and students across locations. But I think communication has been a huge piece of it and just creating a supportive environment because I think anyone involved in the business that feels valued and supported, I think cares. And then that spreads to, all the way down to people who are stepping into our studio for the first time.
Yeah, very cool. Very
Yeah,
inspiring. Communication is important.
it's huge.
It's everything.
If you don't have it, you have nothing. So
Right.
yeah. So
Well, yeah,
I've
thank
really
you.
enjoyed it.
Yeah, I have too. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. And we're gonna try to link everything you mentioned. I'll send this out in our newsletter whenever this episode comes out. But let me know if you have any other thoughts that I can add to it. And thanks everyone for tuning in this week. We'll see you next week.
Cool.
Thank you so much for tuning into the podcast. Your support really does matter. This podcast is produced by Highland Yoga with music by our very own teaching team member, Lauren C. If you want to learn more about Highland Yoga, visit our website at highland-yoga.com or email us to sign up for our weekly newsletter at info@highland-yoga.com. See you next week for more of Find Your Flow.